My name's Esther. I've just got back from a youth camp for the week, which is why I'm speaking definitely lower than I usually do. There were lots of great moments and lots of memories shared and colds shared too, so bear with. But I'm really excited to be here this evening and to get the opportunity to interview Lottie. Lottie is a good friend of mine, so it's always fun to get to interview friends up here. One of my favourite facts about Lottie is that she knows how to castrate sheep. She is also head of prayer at St. Paul's. Those two things aren't necessarily connected. Um, but I will let her tell you a little bit more about herself. How long have you been in Jersey? What is it that you do? What leads you to castrate these sheep? And how long have you been in Jersey? Tell me a bit about life.
Hello.
You're on, I think.
Am I that close enough? Can you hear me? Cool. So hello, I'm Charlotte. I have been on Jersey for about 3 years now. I am married to a woman called Peter McGowan, and I am a veterinary surgeon, hence. Yes, we actually did it all in 1 year. I don't think I told you this, but I sat my finals in like June 2023. We then got married in July. We moved to Jersey in September, and then I started my full-time job.
That's efficient, if you ask me.
A wild year. Yeah.
So, as Paul mentioned, we have Hope services once a month at the beginning of every single month, and it's an opportunity to hear how God has worked in people's lives. So, could you tell us a little bit about where you feel like your faith journey started?
So I was born and raised in a Christian household. My grandfather was actually a vicar in a Church of England church back home in Manchester. And so I guess my faith journey began when I was really little, born and raised into it. But then got about the mid-teens age, and I guess was met with pushback for the first time ever. I had friends that challenged my faith, and I sort of lent into that and really, I guess, wandered away from God, got really angry at the concept of Him, and then was about 15 or 16, and we went to a different church for the first time. It had the gospel preached to me in a way that I'd never understood it before, and then they did an altar call, which is in Christian lay terms means that they basically make that call to say, do you want to give your life to Christ? And I felt my body stand up. And I have no recollection of the conscious brain telling legs to stand. And I opened my eyes, was like, oh my goodness, I'm standing. Someone's going to pray for me. But prior to that, I was really angry, really bitter. After that moment, my mother always said that I completely changed. I was day and night. I became this joyful, grace-filled young woman. She thought I just wanted a laptop for Christmas. And it continued on after Christmas. So,
Did you get your laptop?
I did get
my laptop. Okay,
good. Good old hybrid, the old laptop. So then that was sort of, I guess, the moment that I felt the Holy Spirit really enter into me, and I was baptized for that. But then still had my wandering, still had my big questions, still didn't really have much of a knowledge base behind God. And then
Yeah, I think something that's been so cool over the Hope services is that as we look back on our lives, it becomes so evident how God has been part of them even before we had fully given our lives to Him. And you mentioned you got married at the church that your grandfather was minister at, right?
Yeah, so we lived opposite that church.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason Peter and I met is that he did the gap year course that Joel actually did, but like 2-3 years after Joel did. And the minister at the time brought the young adult to our church, and part of his team stayed in my house. And so then it was really fun to then be married in the church that my family grew up in, and that was the faith-based church, and also kind of the basis of our marriage as well, was how we met at church. And then we're not part of that church anymore, but it's really fun that it's been like part of that background, part of my faith.
Yeah, I really love the stories of legacy of faith. And even as you recognize that, maybe you're going to church more for your parents or more out of just habit, or yeah, or duty, yeah. And then you had this amazing moment where, like you said, it wasn't an active thought, which I think as you tell a bit more of your story, it becomes so apparent that that was really important actually, that it wasn't at that point logic that got you there, that you can look back and say that was God. So you had this moment where you experienced God's presence. You were about 15 at the time, you said. And then you mentioned about being quite challenged through school and through the subjects that you studied at school, particularly science.
So I, to get into veterinary medicine, I had to study chemistry and then biology and then another science. And I did chemistry, biology and geology. But it was in my A-level biology class. The teacher was talking about how neurons work. And she was saying that there are lipid membranes, so fat, and then it's sodium, potassium, which are two basic molecules moving in and out of that lipid membrane. And I was like, oh, so hang on, so that's all of my movement? She's like, yeah. So that's all of my thought process as well. She's like, mm-hmm. So my whole conscious being is sodium and potassium moving in and out of the lipid membrane. She's like, yeah. I was like, oh, I'm not okay with that. And everybody else was fine with it, but I just wasn't fine with it. And I had this whole, like, there must be so much more to life and so much more to humanity and creation than just this movement of chemicals in and out of a substance. It just it didn't sit well with me. So I sort of went down a bit of a spiral. And what we talked about, the thing that almost brought me back was actually through my A-level exams. I saw God move in ways that it could only have been God. The reason I'm a vet now was because I managed to get my 1 mark in my GCSE English that meant that I could then do each step. And as in my A-level biology exam, there was a beam of light on my page for about half of the exam. I've got something called ERNS, which is like a light sensitivity thing. So I really, really struggled to read a bright white paper on this bright light. Ask the exam.
Not ideal.
We reviewed the paper and did all like the correct things. But even after that exam, after I got into vet school, the head of the school came up to me and was like, even if you hadn't appealed that paper, you would have still got in. Like, that wasn't me. Because I had to sit back and basically pray for God, like, please just do the thing. And that's the reason I'm where I am, and even through all of my university exams as well. Went through each year, he came through in a way that was like, okay, this actually wasn't me. And it got to the point where exams didn't stress me out because I knew that God was just going to do it. And I was like, oh, like genuinely it'll be what it'll be. I know God's got me, and even if I don't make it, he's got me. But yeah, so that was almost like I had this spiral in my A-level biology exam, and then had this almost again like practical demonstration of how God was guiding me and looking after me through that season.
Yeah, I think that question of like, is there more to life than this? As a scientist, you see so like physically in your work and your studies, and so that follow-up of God being like, hey, sometimes it's just me and you can't explain it in a textbook, again, I think is like evidence of God's grace in our lives, that he does that. I was really fascinated when we were talking before about, you struggle with this concept of everything being explained through, insert scientific words here, lipids, things. How mitochondria, yes, I got very excited about the one biology word that I remember from GCSEs. How would you say you sort of settled that question of like, okay, so we can explain lots of how things work, where in that is there room for God? How would you answer that if someone comes to ask you?
There's a few ways I guess I go about it, and my brain's quite logical, so like each area is kind of got its own section. One of the ways is I feel that sometimes you step into creation and step into the presence. You look at a leaf, look at the sea, and you have this weird, bizarre, like visceral sense of peace and awe, and that was like, oh my goodness, this is so much bigger than me. That can't come from if there was not a higher being that created it. If we just happened here by accident, we wouldn't be getting that sense of feeling. And a similar thing one of C.S. Lewis's arguments for there being a creator, there being a God, was this sense of there being a moral law. So we as humans and as humanity seem to have this concept of like wanting to love and wanting to protect people. And when we see wars, we, even non-Christians, you know, most people would go, actually, that's wrong. If we were just a bunch of cells, and if it didn't really matter, then why do we get that sense and that feeling? Where do we get that correctness, that moral law from? And I believe that's because there's a God that created us and instilled that within us to then protect his creation and protect each other. Because we're making
So cool. Again, something that I love about these interviews is that you get to ask questions to people with lots of different experiences, and so it's really cool to be able to ask a scientist who's gone through these questions and has found that God is big enough. God is able to deal with these doubts and these big questions for sure. So you're about 15, you had this big question, and then through seeing God work in your life in, and again, ways that we can only explain through him and his grace, you then ended up going to university. And as life is, you don't just face one challenge. That was another quite challenging season for you. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how your faith kind of played a part in that too?
So uni was bittersweet for me. I had a really good church. I really lent into my relationship with God and the Bible. That actually started really loving Scripture, loving finding answers to those big questions. And it was I'd done. We do a 5-year degree for veterinary, so it's sort of like a long go. And I'd done what was the equivalent of most other people's 3 years of uni. And we basically had my faith really challenged and really shaken right down to the core. And I went through this whole process of, is God even real? And I went back to the core of, well, I know there must be a creator God. And then I went through maybe 3 or 4 days where I was seeking out, well, maybe there's other faiths. Maybe just because I was raised in Christianity doesn't necessarily mean that was the right one. I'm going to seek out the others. Sort of looked at some other majors, and each time I came across them, I got a real sense of, okay, there's truth in this, but actually the core of it isn't real. So it was like lies wrapped in truth. And then I came back to the God of the Bible and was like, right, okay, I've gone through that whole walk, fix this problem. And the way God spoke to me in that scenario is he said this verse to me, which is going to be so it's 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9. So God said to me in that scenario, he said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And at the time I was like, that's not a yes from you. No, that's not what I want to hear, Lord. I need you to fix the problem. You're a logical God. I know you've got me, so answer my prayer. Do the thing. And he said again, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. And I think that was possibly either the first time or the most tangible time I was met with the person of Jesus, knowing that I therefore can boast in the verse goes on to say, I therefore will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Even in my questioning and my doubt and my wrestling with God for an answer and how to move forward, actually that was Christ making his power rest upon me and me being made perfect in that weakness. And it really started me on this, I guess, next step of my journey with the Lord, where I could really learn what it is to have I'm still learning what it is to have a relationship with Jesus, to come to him in my weakness so that his power can rest upon me. And it's funny that it's so deeply ironic that I've had a really hard days recently. And my wonderful husband this afternoon reminded me of this verse. It's like, what are you preaching on? You have to allow yourself to recognize your weakness, recognize your human weakness, for Christ to then have his power rest upon me. Because I'm not such a doer. I like to get things done. As a professional, we're so used to being met to high standards, and so you're trying to compete to that all the time, and it throws you off slightly to actually admit humbly that I cannot do it. So this has been a verse that was really significant back then, and even now it's still speaking.
I think one of the most powerful things about the verse is that it essentially teaches us to get out of our own way, and that sometimes the world tells us a lot about like find the answer within. And this verse is that it's never gonna be enough if we're looking inwards and we're expecting ourselves to be able to. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, you mentioned a little bit about how this verse still speaks to you today. In kind of closing, what is it that you would say to somebody who is exploring faith or has questions themselves at this time?
Especially based off that faith as well, I do think sometimes one of the things that was a big stopper for me, even making that jump to declaring that I was a Christian or making the jump to sort of sharing this evening, was that the whole that I'm not good enough, or I'm not that eloquent, I am a bit and so it's a real grace that God has helped me so much this evening. And so actually, you don't have to be perfect to meet with Jesus. You don't have to be perfect. Your journey isn't finished. To then be able to share your story and to be able to share how God is working in your life. None of us are a finished product, and especially the people at the front that we see leave, like none of us are a finished product. But God just wants us as we are in our weakness, because He wants to fill us with His grace.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, and just that really important message that, we don't have to wait till we feel like we're enough, because the answer is that Jesus is enough. I'd love to pray for you before we have our final song, if that's okay. Dear Lord, I thank you so much for Lottie. Once again, I thank you for how you've been at work in her life, Lord. And I pray that truth, that your grace is sufficient for us, Lord, that your grace is sufficient for her, will be something that she continues to hold on to through all seasons of life, Lord. And I pray for anyone who is here this evening who is wrestling with that too, Lord. I pray that you would help that truth settle in their hearts too, that you would reveal yourself to them. I thank you that you are beyond answers in a textbook, that you are big enough to deal with our questions, our doubts, our failures, and our shortcomings, Lord, that it is your grace that we lean on. Amen. Thank you so much, Lottie.